Do you know what the royals of Victorian England actually ate? Some of their meals were shocking, extravagant, and downright strange by today's standards. From unusual meats to bizarre desserts, these dishes reveal a side of history most of us never see. Let's uncover 30 foods that once graced the tables of kings and queens and prepare to be surprised. Swan soup. When you think of indulgent royal cuisine, perhaps truffles or caviar come to mind, but for Victorian royalty, nothing quite embodied extravagance like swan soup. Picture a gilded dining hall in Buckingham Palace, chandeliers glinting, servants gliding across polished floors, and a simmering cauldron of a bird that seems more myth than meal. Swans with their snow-white feathers and graceful necks were symbols of wealth, status, and, if you were bold enough, a daring palate. The dish traces its origins to medieval England, when swan was reserved almost exclusively for nobility, and by the Victorian era, it had become a ceremonial centerpiece, especially for banquets intended to impress visiting dignitaries. The ingredients were deceptively simple, yet notoriously difficult to procure. A swan, ideally still young, would be cleaned and plucked, sometimes with the feathers left for dramatic presentation. Aromatics like onions, leeks, and herbs such as thyme and bay were added, alongside a rich, slow-cooked broth made from the bird's bones and a splash of sherry or Madeira to deepen the flavor. Some chefs even added slices of veal or poultry for extra body, and a finishing touch of cream could turn the clear broth into a luxurious, velvety soup. Preparation was an exercise in patience. Hours of careful simmering, skimming, and seasoning, with every step designed to extract maximum flavor while maintaining a delicate, refined texture worthy of a royal table. Beyond taste, swan soup carried emotional and cultural resonance. It was a dish that reflected centuries of tradition, the careful preservation of aristocratic privilege, and the meticulous artistry of Victorian chefs. Guests would marvel at its presentation, commenting on the poise of the bird even as it was served in liquid form, while the host relished the dual display of culinary mastery and social dominance. Viewed through a modern lens, the idea of eating swan is shocking, even a little macabre, contrasting sharply with today's focus on sustainable, ethical protein sources or trendy plant-based alternatives. Yet swan soup remains a fascinating window into Victorian dining, a reminder of the lengths humans will go to impress, to experiment, and to celebrate the dramatic intersection of taste and theater on a plate. It's extravagant, unusual, and historically resonant, a dish that whispers stories of wealth, curiosity, and the very particular whims of royalty. Jellied eel terrine. Imagine walking the cobbled streets of Victorian London, past smoke-filled chimneys and bustling markets, the scent of freshly baked bread mingling with something far more pungent, the unmistakable aroma of eels. Eels were a working-class staple, particularly in East London, where they thrived in the Thames and were cheap, abundant, and surprisingly versatile. But in the hands of a Victorian chef catering to the curious palates of the upper class, these humble fish were transformed into something that could grace a stately dining table: the jellied eel terrine. This dish, gelatinous and visually unusual, captured the era's fascination with texture, preservation, and the fine line between culinary creativity and shock value. The ingredients were straightforward yet precise. Fresh eels were cleaned and cut into uniform pieces, then simmered with onions, herbs, and a splash of vinegar to balance the richness. The cooking liquid, strained and cooled, formed a natural gel thanks to the eel's own collagen, which would set around the pieces in a terrine mold. Some chefs enhanced the effect with a delicate layer of aspic, or added subtle spices like mace or allspice to lend complexity without overpowering the eel's flavor. Presentation mattered enormously. The eel pieces were arranged neatly in the mold, often in intricate patterns, so that when the terrine was sliced, it revealed a mosaic-like cross-section, both decorative and slightly unnerving to modern eyes. Jellied eel terrine carried cultural resonance far beyond its taste. It reflected Victorian England's obsession with refinement, preservation, and the artistry of food, even when the raw materials were decidedly common. It was a dish that bridged social classes, elevating an East End staple to the dining halls of the curious elite, and it demonstrated the ingenuity and occasionally the audacity of Victorian chefs. Today, the idea of a wobbly, gelatin-bound eel might seem shocking or unappetizing, a far cry from Instagram-ready dishes or sleek meal kits. Yet the jellied eel terrine endures as a window into a world where resourcefulness met artistry, where texture was as important as taste, and where the humble eel could be transformed into a conversation piece at any table. It's a dish that surprises, intrigues, and reminds us that the culinary past is full of daring experiments, often rooted in necessity, tradition, and a very particular sense of spectacle. Caviare and anchovy creations. Victorian royalty had a penchant for the exotic, the salty, and the visually striking, and nothing captured both the imagination and the taste buds quite like caviare and anchovy creations. These dishes were not merely about sustenance, they were a statement of wealth, sophistication, and adventurous palate. While caviar imported from the sturgeon-rich rivers of Russia and Persia was already an emblem of opulence, anchovies, long prized in Mediterranean and French cooking, brought a punch of umami that could transform any dish into something theatrically complex. Together, they became staples of Victorian banquets, served in layered terrines, whipped into spreads, or incorporated into delicate canapes that dazzled guests and subtly reminded them of the host's refined taste. The ingredients themselves were simple but carefully curated. Fresh caviar, or its more readily available preserved variety, provided a briny richness, while anchovies were either finely chopped or pureed, sometimes blended with butter, cream, or hard-boiled eggs to soften their intense saltiness. Herbs such as tarragon or parsley were added for brightness, and lemon juice or sherry could cut through the richness, offering balance to the dish. Chefs often arranged these mixtures in intricate patterns within terrines, layered them with slices of toast or puff pastry, or piped them elegantly onto silver platters, transforming humble seafood into visual and culinary art. The preparation demanded attention and precision, but it was also an exercise in subtlety. Overpowering the caviar or anchovies would ruin the delicate harmony, and so each component was handled with care, often chilled, set, or gently molded before presentation. The result was a dish that impressed not only through taste, but also through its striking appearance, a shimmering mosaic of color and texture that invited admiration before the first bite. Caviar and anchovy creations held emotional resonance, signaling cultural curiosity and the blending of domestic ingredients with imported luxuries. They reflected Victorian fascination with global flavors, yet also with spectacle. Dining was a performance, and these dishes were star performers. Today, such flavors might challenge modern palates accustomed to mild spreads or predictable canapes, but in their time, they epitomized culinary sophistication. They remind us that even in an era known for strict etiquette and social propriety, food could be daring, playful, and surprisingly bold, an elegant balancing act between flavor, artistry, and aristocratic showmanship. Pickled herring in silver platters. To imagine pickled herring gracing the tables of Victorian royalty might seem odd at first glance. Today, it conjures images of humble fishermen's fare or Scandinavian smorgasbords, not gilded dining halls. Yet in the Victorian era, pickled herring was elevated from a common ingredient into a dish of sophistication, presented with a flourish on polished silver platters that reflected both light and social status. This transformation speaks volumes about the period, a time when preservation, display, and subtle artistry could turn even the simplest food into a statement of taste, wealth, and cultural knowledge. And the dish began with humble origins. Freshly caught herring, cleaned and gutted, then cured in vinegar, salt, sugar, and aromatic spices such as bay leaves, peppercorns, and mustard seeds. Some chefs added slices of onion, hard-boiled eggs, or diced apples to introduce contrasting textures and flavors, while a drizzle of fine oil or a sprig of fresh dill elevated the presentation. Once pickled, the herring was carefully arranged in silver serving dishes, sometimes in intricate patterns or layered with garnishes, creating a tableau that was both visually striking and practically functional, preserving the fish while offering a centerpiece for conversation and admiration. Preparation required required both skill and patience. The curing process demanded precision to achieve the right balance of saltiness, acidity, and subtle sweetness, while the presentation needed a careful hand to ensure that every fillet lay perfectly alongside its companion. The silver platters were not mere decoration. They reflected the meticulous attention to detail characteristic of Victorian dining, signaling to guests that no expense had been spared, no gesture of refinement overlooked. Culturally, pickled herring and silver platters embodied more than taste. It was a bridge between humble tradition and aristocratic indulgence. It reminded diners of the ingenuity inherent in preserving food, the careful orchestration of flavors, and the Victorian fascination with display. Today, the dish might seem strange or even unappetizing, yet it stands as a testament to a time when creativity, patience, and presentation could transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. In its quiet elegance, it whispers stories of social aspiration, culinary artistry, and the curious pleasures of a royal table that reveled in both the familiar and the exotic. Roast peacock. Few dishes capture the drama and spectacle of Victorian banquets quite like roast peacock. Unlike the subtle elegance of roast beef or the comforting familiarity of poultry, the peacock was chosen not solely for taste, but for its theatrical impact. Imagine a grand hall in a royal palace, sunlight glinting off crystal chandeliers, and a massive bird, feathers glistening with iridescent blues and greens, presented as the centerpiece of a banquet. For Victorian hosts, serving peacock was as much about visual artistry and social signaling as it was about indulgence, a way to astonish guests and assert prestige through sheer culinary bravado. The preparation of a roast peacock was both meticulous and labor-intensive. Young birds were carefully plucked, though often the tail feathers were left intact or replaced with replicas to maintain the striking display. The flesh, surprisingly mild for such a visually dramatic bird, was stuffed with a mixture of breadcrumbs, herbs, and sometimes dried fruits or nuts, reflecting the era's love of contrasting flavors. The bird was then roasted slowly, basted with butter and stock to retain moisture, while chefs monitored every inch to ensure the skin remained golden and the juices rich. Once cooked, the peacock was reassembled on a serving platter with its tail feathers fanned out, a showpiece that was almost too beautiful to carve. Culturally, roast peacock was more than a meal. It was a statement. It reflected the Victorian fascination with the exotic, the aristocratic desire for spectacle, and a society obsessed with hierarchy and display. Guests would marvel at the sheer size, color, and craftsmanship of the presentation, while the host basked in the admiration of having orchestrated both a feast and a performance. From a modern perspective, the dish is almost unthinkable, a combination of extravagance, ethical dilemmas, and culinary curiosity that clashes with contemporary sensibilities. Yet roast peacock remains a vivid window into Victorian dining rituals, where the boundaries between food, art, and theater blurred. It reminds us that in a time of rigid social codes and strict etiquette, the royal table could still accommodate whimsy, audacity, and the occasional flourish that bordered on the fantastical. In every roasted feather and carefully arranged platter, there is a story of ambition, artistry, and the human desire to impress through the medium of food. Stuffed dormice. The idea of eating dormice today might make modern diners recoil. Yet, in Victorian England, stuffed dormice were considered a delicacy with roots stretching back to ancient Rome. These tiny rodents, plump and rich in fat, were prized for their tenderness and novelty, often appearing on the tables of the adventurous upper class. Far from being a common snack, they were symbols of refinement, curiosity, and the willingness to embrace the unusual in pursuit of culinary distinction. Victorian royalty and the wealthy elite often served them at banquets to impress guests with both daring taste and knowledge of exotic or historical cuisine. Preparation was a careful and intricate process. Dormice were first fattened, then killed, cleaned, and deboned, a labor-intensive task requiring dexterity and patience. The filling typically consisted of a mixture of breadcrumbs, chopped nuts, herbs such as sage or thyme, and sometimes minced meat, designed to enhance the natural richness of the tiny creatures. After being stuffed, the dormice were sewn closed, glazed with butter and roasted slowly until golden and crisp. Presentation was essential. They were often arranged in small, ornate platters, sometimes garnished with fresh herbs or fruit, turning what might otherwise seem a humble rodent into an elegant and eye-catching dish. The dish carried emotional and cultural resonance. For the Victorian palate, it was a conversation starter, a show of culinary sophistication, and a nod to historical precedent. The consumption of dormice also reflected a broader fascination with exoticism, preservation, and the boundaries of taste, illustrating how the wealthy could transform even the most unusual ingredients into symbols of status and artistry. Today, the idea of consuming dormice strikes most as shocking, if not grotesque, highlighting the stark contrast between Victorian extravagance and contemporary sensibilities regarding ethics, sustainability, and animal welfare. Yet stuffed dormice remain a fascinating glimpse into a period when dining was as much about spectacle, storytelling, and social signaling as it was about flavor. They remind us that in the hands of skilled chefs and daring diners, even the tiniest, most unexpected creatures could become a centerpiece of conversation, a testament to ingenuity and a marker of culinary daring on the royal table. Bird's nest pudding. Bird's nest pudding was one of those Victorian desserts that seemed to arrive straight from a storybook, delicate, whimsical, and just a little mysterious. Far from the humble puddings of the common household, this dish was a symbol of opulence and creativity, appearing on the tables of the wealthy, often as the crowning glory of a multi-course banquet. Its name, inspired by the intricate, airy structure of an actual bird's nest, hinted at both its visual appeal and the level of skill required to prepare it. Victorian diners were fascinated by the theatricality of food, and the bird's nest pudding epitomized that fascination. A sweet, ethereal creation that celebrated elegance and a touch of whimsy. The ingredients were deceptively simple, though their transformation required finesse. Eggs, sugar, and milk formed the base, whipped into a frothy custard that could support the delicate shape of the nest. Some recipes included breadcrumbs or finely ground almonds for texture, while a hint of nutmeg or rosewater added aromatic complexity. The nest itself was formed from spun sugar, lightly toasted breadcrumbs, or carefully piped meringue shaped to resemble a tiny, perfect nest. Occasionally, chefs added miniature fruits, berries, or sugared almonds to represent eggs tucked within, enhancing both the visual charm and the sweetness. Preparation demanded patience, whipping, folding, and carefully molding each component, all while maintaining the light, airy quality that made the dessert so enchanting. Culturally, bird's nest pudding reflected Victorian ideals of refinement and artistry in the kitchen. It was not merely about taste, but presentation, storytelling, and the subtle thrill of seeing a familiar concept, nature itself, translated into edible form. Guests would admire the craftsmanship, remark on the delicate flavor, and perhaps marvel at the ingenuity required to balance beauty with palatability. Viewed through a modern lens, the dish might appear quaint or overly elaborate, a far cry from the streamlined desserts of today's cafes or Instagram-ready treats. Yet bird's nest pudding remains a testament to the Victorian love of spectacle, the artistry of home and professional chefs, and the enduring human delight in transforming simple ingredients into something magical. It's a dessert that captures imagination, indulgence, and the very particular charm of an era fascinated with beauty, precision, and culinary storytelling. Chocolate-covered lobster. Chocolate-covered lobster might sound like a modern foodie dare or a bizarre TikTok challenge, but in the opulent world of Victorian dining, such an experiment was not only conceivable, it was celebrated. Victorian royalty and the upper class had an insatiable appetite for novelty, and the culinary ethos of the time encouraged audacious combinations, blending the exotic with the familiar, the sweet with the savory. Lobster, already a symbol of luxury, was elevated further by an unexpected partner: rich, molten chocolate. The dish epitomized the era's fascination with spectacle, indulgence, and the thrill of the unusual on the royal table. The ingredients were straightforward yet carried inherent challenges. Fresh lobster, steamed or boiled until tender, provided a delicate, slightly sweet seafood base, while dark chocolate, sometimes infused with hints of vanilla or aromatic spices like cinnamon, formed a decadent coating. Some chefs added a thin layer of apricot jam or cream to bridge the flavors, softening the contrast between the briny lobster and the intense chocolate. The preparation demanded both precision and timing. The lobster needed to be perfectly cooked, succulent and firm, while the chocolate had to be tempered carefully to form a smooth, glossy shell. Too hot, and it could melt into a runny mess. Too cold, and it would crack or fail to adhere properly. The presentation was key. Often, lobster tails were arranged elegantly on silver platters, enrobed in shiny chocolate, sometimes garnished with edible gold leaf, candied citrus, or delicate flowers, turning the dish into a visual spectacle as well as a taste adventure. Culturally, chocolate-covered lobster embodied the Victorian love of culinary experimentation and the desire to impress. It was daring, indulgent, and slightly theatrical, reflecting a society that equated gastronomy with status and creativity. Guests were as intrigued by the audacity of the pairing as by the taste itself, making the dish a conversation piece as much as a meal. From a modern perspective, it's shocking, perhaps even off-putting, yet it offers a window into a world where boundaries of flavor were stretched. Luxury and novelty were inseparable, and dining was a performance. Chocolate-covered lobster reminds us that Victorian chefs and diners were unafraid to challenge expectations, blending boldness, artistry, and a touch of whimsy into every extravagant bite. Blood sausage soufflé. Blood sausage, or black pudding, as it was often called, was a staple of Victorian England, especially among the working classes, yet it also found its way into the kitchens of the adventurous elite. The idea of transforming such a humble, iron-rich sausage into a delicate soufflé might seem audacious today, but in Victorian culinary culture, innovation and the elevation of ordinary ingredients were part of the gastronomic art. The blood sausage soufflé combined richness with airiness, darkness with lightness, creating a dish that challenged both expectations and palates. The ingredients were deceptively simple: fresh blood sausage, eggs, cream, and seasonings such as nutmeg, black pepper, or a touch of clove. Some chefs incorporated finely chopped onions or sautéed herbs to add layers of flavor, balancing the intensity of the sausage with subtle aromatic notes. The key to the dish was technique. The eggs had to be whipped to perfection, folding in air gently to achieve the iconic soufflé rise while maintaining the integrity of the savory blood sausage. Buttered ramekins were essential, as the mixture needed to cling just enough to climb and bloom in the oven without collapsing. A careful hand and precise timing made the difference between a dense, disappointing pudding and a golden, airy masterpiece that would draw admiration from diners. The cultural resonance of blood sausage soufflé lay in its duality. It was at once practical and luxurious, rustic and refined. It reflected the Victorian fascination with transformation, turning ingredients associated with thrift and necessity into a dish worthy of elegant dining rooms. Royal chefs and ambitious hosts delighted in the shock value of serving such a dark, rich item in a format typically reserved for sweet, ethereal desserts. Guests were compelled to reconcile their preconceptions with the experience of taste, texture, and aroma, a playful but sophisticated exercise in culinary surprise. Viewed through modern eyes, the dish is unusual, even startling, yet it exemplifies the ingenuity and daring of Victorian cuisine. Blood sausage soufflé reminds us that the era prized creativity, audacity, and mastery of technique, transforming ordinary ingredients into something extraordinary. It is a testament to an age when dining was as much about spectacle and experimentation as it was about flavor, a savory challenge that still intrigues and shocks, whispering stories of culinary ambition from the past. Oyster ice cream. Oyster ice cream is the kind of dish that instantly makes modern diners raise an eyebrow. Yet in Victorian England, it was considered an adventurous treat for the daring and elite. The era was obsessed with novelty, extremes of flavor, and culinary experimentation, and oysters, already prized for their luxury and aphrodisiac reputation, found themselves in the most unexpected contexts. Turning them into ice cream was both a technical feat and a statement. A sweet meets savory concoction that showcased a chef's skill, a host's sophistication, and the era's appetite for the extraordinary. The ingredients were deceptively simple, but the balance was delicate. Fresh oysters provided a briny, slightly sweet base, often combined with cream, sugar, and a touch of lemon or white wine to temper the richness. Some chefs incorporated a subtle custard base, carefully blending egg yolks with cream to create a smooth, stable texture capable of freezing without separating. The key challenge lay in harmonizing the sea-salty flavor of the oysters with the creamy sweetness of the ice cream, ensuring that neither element overpowered the other. Timing and technique were critical, as overcooked oysters or poorly tempered custard could ruin the delicate balance, while a perfectly executed batch produced an unusual but surprisingly elegant dessert. Oyster ice cream carried cultural significance beyond its taste. It reflected the Victorian fascination with novelty, exploration, and the theater of dining. A host serving this dish could impress guests with both their adventurous palate and their understanding of cutting-edge culinary trends. It also demonstrated the era's willingness to blur boundaries between courses and flavors, merging what we today consider the savory and the sweet in ways that challenge the conventional structure of a meal. Viewed from a modern perspective, the idea of cold, briny seafood and ice cream is jarring, a reminder of how tastes and taboos evolve. Yet oyster ice cream serves as a window into a world where culinary curiosity reigned supreme, where innovation often trumped comfort, and where chefs and diners alike reveled in daring combinations. It is a dish that surprises, delights, and occasionally horrifies, embodying the adventurous spirit of Victorian dining and the era's fearless approach to flavor, texture, and spectacle. Turtle soup. Turtle soup was one of the most celebrated and extravagant dishes on the Victorian table, a symbol of wealth, global trade, and culinary daring. It traced its roots back to the 18th century, when sea turtles harvested from distant oceans were considered a rare and luxurious ingredient, worthy of the most elaborate banquets. By the Victorian era, turtle soup had become a fixture at aristocratic dinners and royal gatherings, admired not only for its flavor but also for the theatrical preparation and presentation that accompanied it. The ingredients for turtle soup were precise and, for the time, exotic. Fresh or preserved turtle meat formed the base, complemented by a rich stock made from the bones and shell, slowly simmered to extract every ounce of flavor. Aromatics such as onions, carrots, celery, and leeks were added alongside herbs like thyme, bay leaves, and parsley. A splash of sherry, Madeira, or port provided depth, while spices, nutmeg, mace, or black pepper added warmth and subtle complexity. Some chefs enriched the soup further with cream or egg yolks, producing a velvety texture that balanced the earthy, slightly gamey taste of the turtle. Presentation was as important as flavor. The soup might be served in elaborate terrines, garnished with finely chopped herbs or delicate croutons, signaling both refinement and opulence. Culturally, turtle soup represented more than a meal. It was a statement of sophistication and global reach. Its presence on the table spoke to a host's access to distant lands, rare ingredients, and highly skilled chefs. Guests were expected to appreciate the combination of exotic flavor and careful preparation, engaging not only their palates, but their understanding of status and taste. The soup also demonstrated the Victorian fascination with science and technique, as chefs carefully managed cooking times and temperatures to achieve the perfect consistency and flavor extraction. From a modern perspective, turtle soup is shocking, even controversial, given contemporary concerns about sustainability and endangered species. Yet it remains a vivid reminder of a time when dining was a performance, when luxury often meant exoticism, and when chefs were celebrated for transforming rare ingredients into culinary masterpieces. Turtle soup embodies the audacity, artistry, and opulence of Victorian cuisine, a dish that told a story of wealth, global influence, and the extraordinary lengths to which dining rituals could go. Fried frog legs. Fried frog legs may seem like a daring dish to modern diners, yet in Victorian England, they occupied a curious niche between novelty and sophistication. Influenced by French cuisine and continental culinary trends, Victorian chefs often sought to introduce foreign flavors and textures to the royal table, transforming humble ingredients into elegant fare. Frog legs, with their tender, slightly sweet meat and delicate texture, offered a perfect canvas for experimentation, allowing chefs to demonstrate skill while tantalizing the adventurous palates of aristocratic diners. The preparation of fried frog legs required attention and finesse. Fresh frog legs were carefully cleaned and skinned, then often marinated in a light mixture of herbs, lemon juice, and sometimes a splash of wine to enhance their subtle flavor. A dusting of flour or cornmeal was used to provide a crisp coating, and the legs were shallow or deep fried in butter or lard until golden brown. The result was a dish that combined delicate meat with a satisfyingly crisp exterior, offering contrast in both flavor and texture. Some chefs added a garnish of fresh parsley, a squeeze of lemon, or a subtle sauce to enhance the presentation and complement the gentle taste of the frog meat. Culturally, fried frog legs reflected the Victorian fascination with the exotic and the theatrical. Serving frog legs allowed hosts to display knowledge of continental cuisine while signaling openness to culinary innovation. Guests were invited to savor something unusual yet refined, a dish that balanced shock value with subtlety. The careful preparation, presentation, and seasoning ensured that the dish remained elegant rather than grotesque, reinforcing the era's belief in the artistry of the kitchen and the social importance of dining as performance. From a modern perspective, the idea of fried frog legs may still provoke hesitation, yet it offers insight into Victorian dining sensibilities. It exemplifies the era's willingness to embrace novelty, the influence of international trends on aristocratic taste, and the creativity required to elevate uncommon ingredients. Fried frog legs remind us that Victorian cuisine was as much about daring experimentation and visual appeal as it was about flavor, providing a fascinating glimpse into a world where curiosity, artistry, and refined technique intersected on the royal plate. Snail stew. Snail stew might seem peculiar to modern diners, yet in Victorian England, it occupied a place of refined curiosity and continental sophistication. Inspired by French and Mediterranean culinary traditions, snails or escargot were considered a delicacy, slow-cooked, seasoned, and transformed into a dish that combined both novelty and elegance. For the Victorian upper class, serving snail stew was a statement of adventurous taste, culinary knowledge, and social distinction, demonstrating a willingness to embrace the exotic and elevate humble ingredients into gourmet experiences. The preparation of snail stew required both patience and care. Fresh snails were purged, cleaned, and sometimes boiled briefly to remove any impurities before being simmered gently in a rich stock. Aromatics, such as onions, garlic, and shallots, provided depth, while herbs like thyme, parsley, and bay leaves enhanced the natural earthiness of the snails. Some recipes incorporated wine, often a dry white or sherry, to intensify flavor and add subtle acidity, while butter or cream created a velvety richness that balanced the dish. Occasionally, diced vegetables or mushrooms were added for texture, and a sprinkle of breadcrumbs atop the stew provided a slight crispness upon serving. The result was a dish that delighted the senses. Tender snails infused with complex flavors, a fragrant broth, and a presentation that suggested both refinement and careful craftsmanship. Culturally, snail stew reflected the Victorian fascination with culinary artistry and the theatricality of dining. The dish was a conversation starter, provoking both curiosity and admiration among guests who might have encountered snails only in gardens or cookbooks. It symbolized the blending of continental techniques with British tastes, a subtle nod to sophistication and cosmopolitan sensibility. The meticulous preparation, careful seasoning, and elegant presentation underscored the social importance of food as performance, signaling a host's skill, taste, and knowledge of exotic ingredients. Viewed today, snail stew might still inspire hesitation or even incredulity, but it offers a vivid glimpse into the Victorian palate. It embodies the era's experimental spirit, the blending of novelty with technique, and the enduring human desire to transform the unusual into something extraordinary. In its earthy richness and delicate craftsmanship, snail stew reminds us that Victorian dining was as much about imagination, social signaling, and adventure as it was about sustenance and flavor. Pickled walnuts and exotic fruits. Pickled walnuts and exotic fruits might seem like a curious pairing to modern palates, yet in Victorian England, these items were symbols of culinary sophistication, ingenuity, and the era's fascination with the exotic. Pickled walnuts were a staple of late-season preservation, turning humble tree nuts into a piquant, tangy accompaniment for meats, cheeses, and pies. Exotic fruits, often imported from colonies or warmer climates, added sweetness, color, and novelty to the table, offering a taste of far-off lands that few diners would ever visit. Together, they embodied the Victorian obsession with flavor contrast, preservation techniques, and the artistry of presentation. The preparation of pickled walnuts was both labor-intensive and precise. Green, unripe walnuts were carefully harvested, pricked, and soaked over several days in brine to remove bitterness. They were then simmered in spiced vinegar, often with cloves, cinnamon, nutmeg, and mustard seeds, until fully infused with flavor and perfectly tender. The pickling process not only preserved the walnuts for months, but also transformed them into a complex ingredient, balancing tartness, spice, and subtle earthiness. Exotic fruits, such as preserved pineapples, candied oranges, or imported figs, were often prepared in syrup or lightly spiced to enhance their natural sweetness, providing a striking contrast to the sharpness of the walnuts. Presentation was key. Platters of pickled walnuts and vibrant fruits were arranged with care, signaling both taste and refinement to the diners who admired the interplay of colors and textures. Culturally, this combination reflected Victorian values of resourcefulness, global curiosity, and social display. Serving pickled walnuts and exotic fruits demonstrated a host's knowledge of preservation techniques, access to rare ingredients, and ability to orchestrate a menu that was both practical and theatrical. The dish also bridged social and economic divides, taking humble or seasonal ingredients and elevating them through technique and pairing with imported luxuries, offering a taste of the wider world without leaving the dining room. Today, the pairing may seem unusual or even challenging, yet it offers a window into Victorian dining sensibilities. It highlights a period when ingenuity, artistry, and the pursuit of flavor defined the table, transforming simple ingredients into experiences. Pickled walnuts and exotic fruits remind us that food was not merely sustenance in Victorian times. It was a performance, a conversation, and a celebration of both nature's bounty and human creativity. Spiced camel meat. Spiced camel meat might seem like an extreme or exotic choice to modern diners, yet in Victorian England, such a dish was a symbol of culinary daring, global reach, and aristocratic curiosity. Victorian chefs and hosts were fascinated by foreign ingredients, often seeking out unusual meats to demonstrate sophistication, worldly knowledge, and the ability to surprise and impress guests. Camel meat, imported from North Africa or the Middle East, offered a lean, slightly sweet flavor that could be elevated with the judicious use of spices, turning a foreign and unfamiliar ingredient into a luxurious feast. The preparation of spiced camel meat required skill, patience, and careful balancing of flavors. The meat, typically slow-cooked to tenderize its firm texture, was marinated in a blend of aromatic spices such as cinnamon, cloves, cumin, and black pepper, sometimes accented with a splash of wine or vinegar to enhance depth. Onions, garlic, and dried fruits like apricots or raisins were often incorporated, adding layers of complexity and a subtle sweetness to contrast the richness of the meat. Chefs might finish the dish with a drizzle of clarified butter or a light glaze, ensuring a glossy, fragrant presentation suitable for a royal table. The cooking process demanded attention to timing and temperature, as overcooking could dry the meat, while undercooking would leave it tough and unpalatable. Culturally, spiced camel meat reflected the Victorian fascination with the exotic, a desire to impress, and a willingness to experiment. Hosting a meal featuring camel meat was a statement. It demonstrated access to rare ingredients, knowledge of foreign culinary techniques, and the adventurousness of both chef and diner. Guests were expected to engage not only with the flavors, but with the narrative of far-off lands, trade, and sophistication embodied in the dish. From a modern perspective, spiced camel meat might be startling, yet it offers a glimpse into the Victorian obsession with novelty, performance. Spiced camel meat reminds us that Victorian cuisine was not merely about sustenance, it was about storytelling, innovation, and the thrill of bringing the unfamiliar onto the plate, transforming an unusual ingredient into an unforgettable experience. Gooseberry pudding with wine reduction.
Hello, it's early June and I'm hoping that some of you might be growing gooseberries. If you're not, well then maybe give it a try soon.
Gooseberry pudding with wine reduction is a quintessential example of Victorian ingenuity, blending tart fruit, delicate pastry, and the refined touch of wine into a dessert that was both visually striking and memorable in flavor. Gooseberries, often overlooked today, were highly prized in Victorian kitchens for their bright acidity and versatility. They provided a refreshing counterpoint to the richness of puddings, custards, and creams, making them a favorite among chefs seeking balance and sophistication in their desserts. Paired with a wine reduction, the humble gooseberry was elevated, creating a dish that symbolized the era's commitment to technique, artistry, and sensory delight. The preparation required care and attention. Gooseberries were first cleaned, hulled, and gently cooked with sugar to release their natural tartness while retaining shape and vibrancy. A light pudding base, often made from flour, butter, eggs, and a touch of milk or cream, served as the vessel for the fruit, absorbing its flavor while providing a soft, tender texture. The wine reduction, typically made from red or fortified wines like port or Madeira, was simmered slowly with sugar and aromatic spices such as cinnamon or cloves, concentrating the flavors into a glossy, fragrant syrup. Once the pudding was baked, the reduction was poured over it, creating a dramatic, jewel-toned finish that enhanced both taste and presentation. Culturally, gooseberry pudding with wine reduction reflected Victorian values of refinement, patience, and culinary storytelling. The dish was not just a dessert, it was a conversation piece, demonstrating the cook's skill in balancing sweet, tart, and complex flavors. It also highlighted the era's fondness for seasonal ingredients and the creative use of wine as a flavor enhancer rather than a standalone beverage. Guests admired the harmony of textures. The soft, yielding pudding contrasted with the vibrant, tangy fruit and the silky wine glaze, while appreciating the artistry involved in the dish's careful assembly. From a modern perspective, gooseberry pudding with wine reduction is a reminder that Victorian desserts were imaginative, balanced, and visually compelling. It exemplifies the era's dedication to elevating modest ingredients through technique, presentation, and pairing, turning simple fruits into a refined culinary experience. The dish celebrates both flavor and craftsmanship, offering insight into a time when patience, creativity, and subtlety defined the royal table. Eel pie.
People are a bit scared of eel.
I'm a bit scared of it.
Don't be scared of eel. It's really nice. It's a bit like salmon, I think.
Eel pie was a curious yet iconic dish in Victorian England, straddling the line between working-class sustenance and culinary curiosity for the upper classes. Freshwater eels, abundant in the Thames and other rivers, were inexpensive, rich in flavor, and surprisingly versatile. While many Victorians knew eels as a common street food, inventive chefs elevated them into a pie suitable for more formal dining, demonstrating both resourcefulness and gastronomic ambition. Served piping hot, encased in golden pastry, eel pie was a dish that combined humble ingredients with sophisticated technique, satisfying both appetite and curiosity. The preparation began with cleaning and filleting the eels, a meticulous task requiring skill to remove bones while preserving the delicate flesh. The eels were then simmered in a seasoned stock, often infused with onions, herbs such as thyme or parsley, and occasionally a splash of white wine or sherry to enhance their natural sweetness. The filling was thickened slightly, sometimes with a roux or breadcrumbs, before being enveloped in a buttery pastry crust. Once baked, the pie emerged golden, aromatic, and visually appealing, a deceptive appearance for what was, at its core, a frugal protein source transformed through technique and presentation. Culturally, eel pie reflected the Victorian fascination with both thrift and culinary creativity. It showed showcased the ability to elevate a humble ingredient into something celebratory, emphasizing skill, seasoning, and visual appeal. For the wealthy, it offered a touch of novelty, a taste of the Thames's bounty presented with refinement. For the common folk, it remained a reliable, filling, and flavorful meal. The dish's dual identity highlighted the era's complex relationship with food, where resourcefulness met artistry, and necessity could inspire innovation. Viewed today, eel pie might seem unusual, even daring, especially to those unaccustomed to its earthy, slightly sweet flavor and gelatinous texture. Yet it serves as a window into Victorian cuisine's ingenuity, reflecting a period when chefs experimented boldly with both flavor and form. Eel pie reminds us that the past valued creativity and storytelling on the plate, turning ordinary ingredients into memorable dining experiences that spoke as much about skill and culture as they did about sustenance. It is a dish that bridges social classes, celebrates local ingredients, and embodies the audacity of Victorian cooking. Stuffed salmon with truffles.
Hey, I'm John Cannell, and today on Preppy Kitchen, we're making a quick, easy, and delicious stuffed salmon.
Stuffed salmon with truffles epitomizes the opulence and extravagance of Victorian haute cuisine, a dish designed to impress both the eye and the palate. Salmon, already prized for its tender, rich flesh, was elevated to a spectacle of luxury when paired with truffles, the elusive, aromatic fungi that symbolized wealth and culinary sophistication. Victorian chefs delighted in transforming familiar fish into a centerpiece worthy of banquets, combining delicate technique with rare ingredients to create a dish that was as much about showmanship as flavor. The preparation demanded precision and artistry. A whole salmon was carefully cleaned and butterflied, creating a cavity for the stuffing. The filling often consisted of a mixture of finely chopped truffles, breadcrumbs, and herbs such as parsley or tarragon, sometimes enriched with egg or cream to bind the mixture while maintaining a light texture. On occasion, finely minced mushrooms or nuts were added to enhance both flavor and complexity. The stuffed fish was gently sewn or folded closed, then baked or poached to perfection, ensuring the salmon remained moist and tender, while the truffle-infused stuffing infused its earthy aroma throughout the flesh. A light glaze or butter sauce often finished the dish, adding sheen and richness for a dramatic presentation on silver platters. Culturally, stuffed salmon with truffles reflected the Victorian obsession with luxury, artistry, and the theatricality of dining. Serving this dish was a statement of wealth, global reach, and refined taste, signaling that the host could source rare ingredients and master advanced culinary techniques. Guests marveled at the presentation, inhaled the heady aroma of truffles, and savored the harmonious contrast between the buttery fish and the earthy, aromatic stuffing. The dish was a conversation piece, a performance, and a celebration of culinary ambition all at once. From a modern perspective, stuffed salmon with truffles remains an emblem of extravagance, yet it also illustrates the Victorian dedication to technique, balance, and flavor layering. It reminds us that dining in the era was about more than nourishment. It was about elegance, ingenuity, and storytelling on the plate. Every bite offered a taste of sophistication, creativity, and the audacious spirit that defined royal and aristocratic tables in Victorian England. Candied beetroot.
Now for my crispy green salad for the table. But what makes it extra special are these candied beets.
Candied beetroot is one of those Victorian dishes that perfectly illustrates the era's fascination with transforming humble ingredients into luxurious, surprising treats. Beetroots, common in peasant and working-class kitchens, were earthy, hearty, and inexpensive, yet when skillfully prepared with sugar and spices, they became a striking, sweet delicacy fit for the tables of the wealthy. Victorian chefs delighted in exploring contrasts, earthy versus sweet, plain versus exotic, and candied beetroot was a prime example of this culinary creativity, turning a simple root vegetable into a visually stunning and flavorful dessert or accompaniment. The preparation required patience and careful technique. Fresh beets were first cleaned, peeled, and sliced or shaped into uniform pieces to ensure even cooking. They were then simmered gently in a syrup made from sugar, water, and sometimes honey, along with aromatic aromatic spices such as cinnamon, cloves, or star anise. The slow cooking process allowed the syrup to penetrate the beetroot, softening the vegetable while intensifying its natural sweetness and adding depth from the spices. After the syrup reduced to a glossy glaze, the beets were cooled and often arranged on fine platters, their deep ruby color and lustrous finish creating a dramatic visual contrast to the other dishes on the table. Some recipes suggested a light dusting of powdered sugar or a sprinkle of citrus zest to brighten the presentation and add subtle flavor complexity. Culturally, candied beetroot reflected Victorian values of ingenuity, artistry, and the elevation of ordinary ingredients. Serving this dish demonstrated a cook's skill and creativity, showcasing the ability to transform the mundane into the extraordinary. It also embodied the era's fascination with preservation and seasonal creativity, as beets were widely available but could be made remarkable through careful technique. From a modern perspective, candied beetroot may seem unusual, yet it offers insight into the Victorian approach to dining, where flavor, texture, and presentation were carefully orchestrated. It is a dish that balances earthiness with sweetness, simplicity with elegance, and practicality with showmanship. Candied beetroot reminds us that Victorian cuisine celebrated experimentation, artistry, and the joy of transforming even the most humble ingredients into something beautiful, memorable, and utterly delicious. Sea urchin tart. Sea urchin tart is one of those Victorian culinary experiments that might make modern diners pause, yet it exemplifies the era's fascination with the exotic, the luxurious, and the audacious. Sea urchins,
a bowl of hundreds of sea urchin eggs cooked into a log and eaten like bread.
Wow, that is something else.
harvested from coastal waters, were prized for their rich, briny roe, which offered a flavor both delicate and intensely oceanic. Victorian chefs, always eager to surprise and impress, transformed this unusual ingredient into a refined tart, combining it with cream, eggs, and subtle seasonings to create a dish that balanced novelty with elegance. Served at banquets or on aristocratic tables, the sea urchin tart was as much about spectacle as it was about taste, a testament to the Victorian love of culinary daring. The preparation was meticulous. Fresh sea urchins were carefully opened, with the roe extracted and cleaned to preserve its delicate texture and natural flavor. The custard-like filling was prepared by blending the roe with cream, egg yolks, and occasionally a hint of butter, herbs, or lemon zest to enhance the marine sweetness and provide balance. A light, flaky pastry shell was crafted to support the filling without overwhelming it, baked just enough to hold the custard while remaining tender and crisp. Once assembled, the tart was often brushed with a light glaze or served with a subtle sauce to enhance the presentation and aroma. The final product was a visually understated yet sensorially bold dish, with the creamy, briny custard providing a contrast to the crisp pastry and the gentle seasoning elevating the natural oceanic flavor of the sea urchin. Culturally, sea urchin tart reflected Victorian fascination with rarity, refinement, and the performance of dining. It was a dish that demonstrated the host's access to exotic ingredients, the chef's skill in handling delicate flavors, and the ability to transform the unfamiliar into an elegant experience. Guests were expected to admire the craftsmanship and daring, savoring both the taste and the novelty of the dish. Viewed through modern eyes, sea urchin tart may seem unconventional or challenging, yet it embodies the Victorian spirit of culinary innovation and spectacle. It is a dish that celebrates technique, artistry, and the thrill of novelty, reminding us that dining in the era was about more than sustenance. It was an immersive experience, a statement of taste, and a journey into the daring creativity of the royal and aristocratic table. Boiled ostrich. Boiled ostrich was one of those extravagant Victorian dishes that straddled the line between spectacle and sustenance, a culinary statement designed to awe guests as much as satisfy hunger. Ostriches, imported from Africa and increasingly prized in Europe during the 19th century, were enormous exotic birds whose sheer size and novelty made them perfect for grand banquets. Victorian chefs, ever ambitious, sought to transform the unusual and impressive into edible art, and boiling an entire ostrich was both a demonstration of technical prowess and a display of wealth, with global connections and daring on the dining table. The preparation of boiled ostrich was no small feat. The massive bird required careful cleaning and butchering, often involving teams of kitchen staff to handle its weight and size. The meat was then submerged in a large stock pot or vat of seasoned water or broth, sometimes infused with herbs such as thyme, bay leaves, and parsley, along with root vegetables like carrots, onions, and leeks to add flavor. The slow, careful boiling process ensured the meat became tender while absorbing the aromatics of the broth, a delicate balance between cooking thoroughly and maintaining moisture in such a large, dense protein. The broth itself could be repurposed as a rich base for soups or sauces, demonstrating the Victorian skill in resourceful cooking. Culturally, serving boiled ostrich was a spectacle of opulence and theatricality. The enormous bird, often presented whole or in large, impressive cuts, symbolized access to exotic ingredients, culinary ingenuity, and social prominence. Guests were encouraged to marvel at its size and uniqueness, engaging with the dining experience as both a visual and gustatory adventure. The dish reflected the Victorian fascination with novelty and global exploration, blending the thrill of the unusual with the tradition of communal feasting. From a modern perspective, boiled ostrich may seem shocking or even impractical, yet it highlights the era's dedication to grandeur, technical skill, and culinary theater. The dish reminds us that Victorian dining was as much about storytelling, social display, and experimentation as it was about flavor. Boiled ostrich is an enduring symbol of an age when chefs and diners embraced audacity, spectacle, and the extraordinary, turning even the most unusual ingredients into unforgettable experiences at the royal and aristocratic table. Pig's head terrine. Pig's head terrine was a classic example of Victorian ingenuity in transforming humble ingredients into sophisticated, flavorful dishes. While the idea of consuming a pig's head might seem off-putting to modern diners, in Victorian England, it was a testament to both frugality and culinary artistry. The terrine allowed chefs to utilize every part of the animal, demonstrating skill in preparation and a deep understanding of texture, flavor, and preservation. What might have been ordinary cuts of meat became a centerpiece worthy of an aristocratic table, blending economy with elegance. The preparation was meticulous and required careful attention. The pig's head was first cleaned and boiled to tenderize the meat and release gelatin from bones and skin, producing a rich, savory stock. Once cooked, the meat was stripped from the bones and combined with herbs such as thyme, bay leaves, and parsley, along with spices like nutmeg and black pepper to enhance its natural flavor. Some recipes incorporated onions, garlic, or a splash of wine for additional depth. The mixture was pressed into a terrine mold, sometimes layered with slices of pork fat or other cuts for added richness, and then chilled until set, creating a firm, sliceable dish with a delicate, savory aroma. Presentation mattered as much as taste. The terrine could be garnished with aspic, herbs, or decorative vegetables, turning it into a visually striking dish. Culturally, pig's head terrine reflected Victorian values of resourcefulness, skill, and the elevation of everyday ingredients. Serving it on the table was both practical and sophisticated, demonstrating a cook's ability to transform a humble animal into a dish of refinement and flavor. It also showcased the era's fascination with preservation and technique, as terrines could be prepared in advance, stored, and served cold, maintaining both taste and structure. From a modern perspective, pig's head terrine may seem unusual or even shocking, yet it provides insight into the Victorian approach to dining, a blend of practicality, artistry, and showmanship. It exemplifies a time when nothing went to waste, when chefs embraced technique and creativity, and when the table was a stage for skillful transformations of even the most modest ingredients into memorable culinary experiences. Pig's head terrine remains a testament to the era's ingenuity, flavor sophistication, and the theatricality of dining. Lobster in jelly. Lobster in jelly was a quintessential Victorian dish that exemplified the era's love for both extravagance and culinary artistry. Far from the straightforward boiled lobster of modern tables, this dish transformed the luxurious crustacean into a visually striking, sculptural creation that combined flavor, texture, and spectacle. Victorian diners were fascinated by both the exotic and the unusual, and encasing lobster in a delicate, savory jelly allowed chefs to showcase their technical skill while presenting an impressive centerpiece. It was a dish designed to delight the eye as much as the palate, perfectly reflecting the theatricality of aristocratic dining. The preparation was meticulous and required careful timing and precision. Fresh lobster was boiled or steamed until tender, with care taken to preserve the delicate sweetness of the meat. The jelly was typically made from a rich stock, often using lobster shells simmered with aromatic vegetables such as onions, carrots, and celery, along with herbs like bay leaves, thyme, and parsley. Gelatin, or naturally extracted collagen from the shells, was incorporated to create a firm yet translucent set. The lobster meat was arranged artfully in a mold, sometimes with additional garnishes such as herbs, vegetables, or eggs, and the jelly poured over it to encase the ingredients completely. Once chilled, the dish set into a gleaming, jewel-like display, the lobster appearing suspended in a shimmering, flavorful medium that invited admiration and curiosity. Culturally, lobster and jelly reflected the Victorian fascination with novelty, refinement, and technical prowess. Serving such a dish demonstrated access to exotic ingredients, mastery of complex preparation techniques, and a flair for presentation. Guests were expected to appreciate not only the taste, but the artistry of its assembly, the delicate balance of flavors, and the imaginative use of gelatin, which allowed the lobster to be displayed in a dramatic, almost theatrical way. From a modern perspective, lobster and jelly may appear unusual or even intimidating, yet it offers a window into Victorian culinary sensibilities. It embodies a time when dining was as much about visual spectacle, creativity, and social signaling as it was about flavor. The dish celebrates technique, imagination, and the Victorian penchant for transforming luxurious ingredients into memorable, conversation-starting experiences that captivated both eyes and taste buds. Venison with maraschino sauce. Venison with maraschino sauce was a quintessential example of Victorian culinary sophistication, marrying the robust, earthy flavors of game with the sweet, slightly tart elegance of maraschino liqueur. In an era when hunting was both a sport and a social statement, venison represented refinement, status, and a connection to tradition. Victorian chefs were adept at taking such prized ingredients and enhancing them with luxurious accompaniments, demonstrating technical skill while catering to the aristocratic palate. The addition of maraschino sauce added an exotic twist, reflecting the period's fascination with global flavors and the blending of sweet and savory in sophisticated dining. The preparation of this dish required careful attention to both cooking and timing. The venison, typically a loin or haunch, was trimmed and gently roasted or sautéed to preserve its tenderness and rich flavor. Overcooking could render the meat dry and tough, so precision was essential. The maraschino sauce was created by reducing the liqueur with sugar, often accompanied by aromatic elements such as cloves, cinnamon, or a touch of citrus zest. Some chefs added a hint of stock or cream to balance the intensity and produce a silky, glossy finish. Once cooked, the venison was plated elegantly, with the sauce drizzled over or served alongside, creating a striking visual and aromatic contrast that delighted guests. Culturally, venison with maraschino sauce symbolized the Victorian fascination with refinement, technical mastery, and the art of presentation. Serving game elevated with a luxurious, slightly exotic sauce communicated wealth, taste, and access to rare ingredients. Guests at such a meal were invited to savor the interplay of flavors. The deep, meaty richness of venison softened by the bright, subtly sweet complexity of maraschino, and to appreciate the skill involved in achieving perfect harmony. From a modern perspective, the dish may seem unusual due to the pairing of liqueur with game, yet it exemplifies Victorian dining philosophy, innovation, balance, and spectacle. Venison with maraschino sauce reminds us that the era prized creativity, sophistication, and technical skill, transforming familiar ingredients ingredients into extraordinary culinary experiences. It captures a moment when flavor, elegance, and audacity converged on the table, offering insight into the artistry and daring spirit of Victorian cuisine. Partridge in puff pastry. Partridge in puff pastry was a hallmark of Victorian opulence, a dish that elevated a familiar game bird into a centerpiece of refinement and culinary artistry. Partridge, prized for its tender, flavorful meat, was a staple at country estates and royal banquets. Yet encasing it in buttery puff pastry transformed the dish into a statement of both skill and elegance. The Victorians loved contrasts, the rusticity of game balanced with the sophistication of delicate pastry, and this dish exemplified their flair for combining technique, flavor, and visual drama. The preparation demanded precision and care. The partridge was first cleaned and seasoned, often with a combination of salt, pepper, and aromatic herbs such as thyme, rosemary, or sage. Some chefs added a layer of forcemeat or finely chopped mushrooms inside the cavity, enhancing flavor and moisture. The bird was then carefully wrapped in sheets of puff pastry, which had to be rolled thin enough to bake evenly, yet strong enough to contain the partridge and any stuffing. Egg wash gave the pastry a golden sheen, while careful scoring allowed steam to escape, ensuring a crisp, flaky crust. The assembled bird was baked slowly to cook the meat through without drying it, the pastry puffing and browning to perfection, creating an elegant package that promised both flavor and spectacle. Culturally, partridge in puff pastry reflected the Victorian fascination with grandeur, precision, and the artistry of dining. Serving a whole bird in pastry was a display of culinary skill and sophistication, signaling access to quality ingredients and mastery of complex preparation techniques. Guests were encouraged to admire the presentation, inhale the aromatic herbs and baked crust, and savor the tender meat encased in its golden shell. The dish exemplified the Victorian approach to dining, where elegance and creativity were as important as flavor, and where the table served as a stage for technical prowess and refined taste. From a modern perspective, partridge in puff pastry may seem elaborate, yet it offers insight into Victorian dining values, artistry, patience, and the elevation of simple ingredients into extraordinary experiences. It reminds us that the era prized drama, balance, and technique, transforming a humble game bird into a dish that delighted both eyes and palate. Partridge in puff pastry endures as a testament to the Victorian love of flavor, presentation, and culinary ingenuity. Capon with almonds and saffron. Capon with almonds and saffron was a dish that perfectly captured the elegance and extravagance of Victorian dining, a celebration of rich flavors, careful technique, and visual spectacle. Capon, a castrated rooster known for its tender, flavorful meat, was prized in aristocratic kitchens for its ability to absorb seasonings and maintain moisture during long cooking. When paired with the delicate nuttiness of almonds and the golden, aromatic luxury of saffron, the dish became a symbol of refinement, culinary artistry, and global influence, embodying the era's fascination with both exotic ingredients and lavish presentation. The preparation was meticulous. The capon was first cleaned, trussed, and lightly seasoned with salt, pepper, and perhaps a touch of herbs such as thyme or marjoram. Some recipes called for the bird to be lightly seared to lock in juices before roasting or braising. Meanwhile, almonds were blanched, toasted, and sometimes ground or incorporated into a rich sauce, while saffron strands were steeped in warm stock or cream to release their distinctive color and aroma. The bird was then cooked slowly, ensuring tender, juicy meat, and often finished with the saffron-infused sauce poured over the capon and a garnish of whole or sliced almonds. The combination of golden hues, nutty textures, and aromatic richness created a feast for both the eyes and palate, elevating the humble poultry into a dish worthy of the grandest Victorian table. Culturally, capon with almonds and saffron reflected the Victorian fascination with luxury, refinement, and global trade. Serving such a dish demonstrated access to rare and imported ingredients, as well as mastery of technique and presentation. Guests were invited to admire the visual appeal, inhale the intoxicating aroma, and savor the layers of flavor that balanced richness, nuttiness, and subtlety. subtle spice. The dish showcased the era's appreciation for culinary theater, where each course was designed to impress and delight. From a modern perspective, capon with almonds and saffron may seem elaborate or exotic, yet it exemplifies the Victorian approach to cooking, elevating quality ingredients through careful technique, thoughtful seasoning, and artistry in presentation. It reminds us that Victorian cuisine celebrated creativity, opulence, and sensory experience, transforming a simple bird into a dish that embodied both sophistication and indulgence, offering a taste of history with every bite. Crayfish salad in aspic. Crayfish salad in aspic was a quintessential Victorian dish that combined technical skill, visual artistry, and the era's fascination with the exotic. Crayfish, with their delicate, sweet flesh, were considered a luxurious ingredient, ideal for showcasing the chef's mastery over both flavor and presentation. Encasing them in aspic, a clear, savory jelly, allowed the Victorian kitchen to transform a simple seafood salad into a dramatic, eye-catching centerpiece, demonstrating both refinement and ingenuity. The dish was as much about spectacle as taste, reflecting a dining culture that prized elegance, novelty, and culinary precision. The preparation was meticulous. Fresh crayfish were first poached until tender, then peeled and carefully arranged with a selection of complementary ingredients, often including lightly cooked vegetables, herbs, or sometimes delicate slices of cold meats or eggs. The aspic was made from a rich stock, usually derived from crustacean shells simmered with aromatic vegetables and herbs and clarified to produce a perfectly clear, flavorful jelly. Gelatin, naturally present in the stock or added separately, provided the necessary structure to set the mixture. The crayfish and accompanying ingredients were placed in molds, and the hot aspic poured over them to encase each element precisely. Once chilled and set, the salad emerged as a jewel-like creation, the crayfish appearing suspended in a glistening, translucent medium that highlighted both texture and color. Culturally, crayfish salad in aspic exemplified the Victorian fascination with luxury, technical mastery, and dining as performance. Serving this dish signaled access to exotic seafood, refined taste, and a command of culinary technique that required patience, precision, and artistry. Guests were invited not only to savor the tender, subtly flavored crayfish, but also to admire the intricate arrangement and the visual clarity of the aspic, which allowed each ingredient to shine. From a modern perspective, crayfish salad in aspic may seem unusual or even intimidating, yet it offers a window into Victorian dining sensibilities. It illustrates a period when presentation was as important as flavor, when chefs transformed everyday ingredients into theatrical experiences, and when dining was an immersive sensory journey. The dish stands as a testament to Victorian creativity, skill, and the enduring appeal of transforming simple seafood into something extraordinary, elegant, and unforgettable. Stuffed rabbit with currants. Stuffed rabbit with currants was a quintessential Victorian dish that combined rustic ingredients with refined culinary technique, transforming a modest animal into a centerpiece worthy of a grand dining table. Rabbit, prized for its tender, lean meat, was both economical and versatile, often featured in country estates and urban kitchens alike. Victorian chefs, known for their ingenuity and flair, elevated this simple protein by pairing it with sweet, jewel-like currants, creating a dish that balanced savory, earthy flavors with a hint of delicate sweetness. The combination reflected the era's fascination with contrasts, rich versus light, rustic versus refined, and its penchant for turning humble ingredients into elegant fare. The preparation of stuffed rabbit with currants required both care and patience. The rabbit was first cleaned, skinned, and trimmed, with careful attention paid to maintaining the integrity of the meat. A stuffing was then prepared, often combining currants with breadcrumbs, onions, herbs such as thyme or sage, and sometimes a touch of butter or cream to bind the mixture and add richness. The stuffing was packed gently inside the rabbit, which was then sewn or trussed to hold its shape during cooking. The meat was roasted or braised slowly, allowing the flavors to meld while ensuring the rabbit remained moist and tender. During cooking, the currants released their natural sweetness, infusing the meat with subtle complexity creativity, while any accompanying sauce or glaze added a glossy finish and additional depth. Culturally, stuffed rabbit with currants reflected the Victorian appreciation for resourcefulness, artistry, and balance. The dish demonstrated a cook's ability to elevate a common ingredient, showcasing technique, flavor layering, and visual appeal. Guests were invited to savor the tender meat alongside the sweet pop of currants, appreciating the interplay of flavors and textures, as well as the elegance of the presentation. From a modern perspective, stuffed rabbit with currants may seem quaint or unusual, yet it offers a window into Victorian dining sensibilities, creativity, attention to detail, and a desire to transform the ordinary into something extraordinary. The dish exemplifies the era's dedication to culinary craftsmanship, the harmonious blending of flavors, and the joy of turning even modest ingredients into memorable celebratory experiences on the table. Fruit-filled mince pies, non-traditional. Fruit-filled mince pies, in their non-traditional Victorian iterations, were a striking departure from the familiar spiced meat-based versions, reflecting the era's experimentation with flavor, texture, and seasonal produce. While mince pies originally combined minced meats with dried fruits and spices, the growing Victorian fascination with sweet confections, imported fruits, and refined desserts led inventive chefs to create versions entirely filled with fruit. These pies celebrated the natural sweetness of berries, apples, currants, and preserved citrus, often enhanced with sugar, wine, or aromatic spices, offering a festive and visually appealing alternative to their more savory counterparts. The preparation of non-traditional mince pies was both meticulous and creative. The fruit filling was carefully selected, cleaned, chopped, and sometimes macerated with sugar, wine, or liqueur to intensify flavor and aroma. Spices like cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, or ginger were added sparingly to complement rather than overpower the natural sweetness. A rich, flaky pastry encased the fruit, rolled thin to achieve a tender, crisp shell that contrasted beautifully with the soft, juicy filling. Each pie was molded or cut into small, uniform shapes, and often decorated with pastry cutouts or lattices to showcase the vibrant fruit within. Baking required precision, as the pies needed to be cooked long enough to meld flavors and set the filling while maintaining a delicate golden crust. Culturally, fruit-filled mince pies demonstrated Victorian creativity, refinement, and the joy of celebrating the season's bounty. These pies were popular at festive gatherings, tea parties, and family celebrations, offering both indulgence and artistry. They reflected the period's embrace of imported fruits, new preservation techniques, and the desire to elevate simple ingredients into visually appealing, flavorful desserts. Guests admired not only the taste, but the craftsmanship, the harmonious blending of textures, and the inventive approach that transformed a traditional dish into something novel and memorable. From a modern perspective, non-traditional fruit-filled mince pies may seem whimsical or even avant-garde, yet they offer insight into Victorian culinary sensibilities. The pies highlight an era when experimentation, elegance, and sensory delight were paramount, and when cooks transformed humble, seasonal ingredients into exquisite creations. They remind us that Victorian dining prized artistry, creativity, and the pleasure of elevating familiar dishes into extraordinary, celebratory experiences for both the eyes and palate. Foie gras with Madeira reduction. Foie gras with Madeira reduction epitomizes the opulence and refinement of Victorian haute cuisine, a dish that showcased both luxurious ingredients and the technical skill of the chef. Foie gras, the delicately fattened liver of a goose or duck, was prized for its rich, buttery, free texture and subtle, earthy flavor. In Victorian England, it symbolized wealth, sophistication, and access to rare and exotic foods, making it a favorite for aristocratic banquets and formal dinners. Pairing it with a Madeira reduction, a sweet, fortified wine sauce, added complexity, enhancing the liver's richness while introducing a vibrant, slightly tangy contrast that delighted both the palate and the eye. The preparation required careful attention and precise technique. The foie gras was typically cleaned, deveined, and sometimes lightly poached or seared to develop a delicate crust while preserving enjoying its creamy interior. The Madeira reduction was prepared separately, slowly simmering the wine with sugar and aromatics such as shallots, herbs, or a touch of spice until it thickened into a glossy, flavorful glaze. Some chefs incorporated a hint of stock or vinegar to balance the sweetness and deepen the sauce's flavor profile. When plated, the foie gras was often accompanied by the reduction drizzled artfully over the top, sometimes garnished with delicate fruits or toasted nuts to add both color and texture. The dish was as much a visual statement as a culinary one, presenting richness and elegance in every bite. Culturally, foie gras with Madeira reduction reflected the Victorian fascination with luxury, global ingredients, and sophisticated dining techniques. Serving this dish signaled access to rare resources, mastery of intricate preparation, and the ability to elevate a single ingredient into a complex, memorable experience. Guests were encouraged to savor the silky, indulgent texture of the foie gras alongside the sweet, nuanced sauce, appreciating both flavor and presentation. From a modern perspective, foie gras with Madeira reduction may seem decadent or controversial, yet it offers insight into Victorian dining philosophy, a celebration of artistry, indulgence, and technique. The dish illustrates how chefs transformed premium ingredients into works of culinary theater, creating an immersive experience that engaged multiple senses. It remains a symbol of the era's taste for sophistication, indulgence, and the extraordinary pleasures of the table. That wraps up our journey through 30 of the most shocking and extravagant foods ever enjoyed by Victorian royalty. If you enjoyed this peek into the opulent, eccentric world of Victorian dining, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more fascinating explorations of history on the plate. And we'd love to hear from you. What's the most surprising dish you dare to try?